The official reason was drugs. The president of Venezuela has 300 billion barrels of oil under his country, 17% of the entire planet's proven reserves. These two facts appear in the same news cycle. Nobody in the mainstream press connects them. There's a senator in this story who sat in a classified briefing, watched two cabinet officials look every member in the eye and swear this was not regime change, and then walked out and told reporters they had been lied to. There is a pardoned foreign president in this story, convicted by an American jury for the exact same crimes in the exact same court, who goes free because Washington liked what he ran. There is a president who goes on live television the same morning the operation concludes and says U.S. oil companies will be very strongly involved in Venezuela. He says this on camera, on the record, the morning of the capture. The detail I keep coming back to is the one that should be simplest. Trump watches the operation in real time from Mar-a-Lago, on screens set up for his viewing, and then calls into Fox News to describe it like watching a movie. A foreign president is dragged from his bedroom at 2 in the morning, and the man who ordered it is watching it as entertainment. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a like. The algorithm actively buries this kind of content. It is 2:00 in the morning on January 3, 2026, and Caracas is about to wake up to the sound of helicopters. Event 1. The night of January 3, 2026, Operation Absolute Resolve 2026. Nicolas Maduro Moros is 63 years old in January 2026. He is the president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the successor to Hugo Chavez, who inherits a revolutionary movement and an oil economy in simultaneous decline. A man who has governed for 13 years through a combination of charisma, repression, economic catastrophe, and the specific political resilience of a leader whose opposition cannot coalesce fast enough to dislodge him before he consolidates the institutions he needs. He has been indicted in the United States since 2020 on charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. He knows about the indictment. He stays in Venezuela until January 3rd. The operation is codenamed Absolute Resolve. Its executive arm is Delta Force, the Army's Tier 1 counterterrorism unit, the same force that kills Osama bin Laden, the same force that executes the most sensitive direct action missions in the U.S. military's portfolio. Delta Force operators are flown to the insertion point by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the helicopter unit whose entire institutional identity is built around flying special operations forces at night with extreme precision. The 160th does not fly routine missions. Its deployment here signals the operational tier of what is happening. The CIA provides the intelligence architecture. A CIA asset operating inside the Venezuelan government tracks Maduro's precise location and movements for months before the operation. The existence of this asset is reported in the initial coverage but never officially confirmed, as is standard when intelligence operations succeed. Without the asset, the operation has no target. Maduro's internal security apparatus is not negligible. Getting Delta Force to the right building at the right moment in a foreign capital requires someone on the inside feeding real-time location data. At approximately 2:00 a.m. on January 3rd, the helicopters are over Caracas. Delta Force enters Miraflor's palace, the seat of the Venezuelan government, and the location Maduro is sleeping in that night. The breach is fast, professional, and violent. Venezuelan officials report that at least 80 people are killed in the operations surrounding the capture, a combination of security personnel at the palace and individuals in the surrounding areas affected by the military action. 80 people. The official U.S. statement does not include a body count. Maduro is secured. He is transported first to the USS Iwo Jima, a U.S. Navy amphibious assault ship positioned in the Caribbean that has been part of the military buildup in the region since September 2025. From the ship, he is flown to Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, the detention facility in Cuba that the United States has used for 25 years for high-value detainees the government does not want processed through ordinary civilian facilities. His time at Guantanamo is brief. He is ultimately transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York, where he faces charges in the Southern District of New York, the federal court that handles the largest and most significant narco-terrorism prosecutions in the United States. At Mar-a-Lago, screens are set up in a secure room. Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, watches the operation unfold in real time. When it concludes successfully, he calls into Fox News. He describes watching the operation in his words like watching television. He says it is a great thing for the American people. He says Venezuelan oil companies will be very strongly involved with American companies. He says this at 7:00 in the morning. Maduro has been in American custody for approximately 5 hours. The official account establishes the frame within hours: a drug trafficking arrest, a narco-terrorism prosecution, the application of American law to a foreign leader who uses state power to facilitate drug shipments into the United States. The press release is issued. The drug charges are real. They exist in a sealed federal indictment from 2020. They have been waiting 6 years for this morning. The 80 people who die on January 3, 2026 are identified in reports by Venezuelan officials and by the few international journalists with access to Caracas in the operation's immediate aftermath. The Venezuelan government releases a partial list of names in the days following the operation. The list includes military personnel assigned to Miraflores Palace security, National Guard officers at checkpoints within the operational perimeter, and civilians in the surrounding neighborhoods who are killed in the secondary military actions that accompany the primary extraction. The United States government issues no statement acknowledging any deaths. The word casualties appears nowhere in any official American communication about the operation. The press release describes a successful law enforcement action. 80 people, none of them appear in the press release. None of them appear in Trump's Fox News call. None of them appear in Rubio's Senate briefing. They are the part of Operation Absolute Resolve that the official frame has no language for, so it omits them entirely, and the American media cycle follows the official frame. What the press release does not mention is the 300 billion barrels. What the press release does not mention is the pardoned president of Honduras, convicted by an American jury of the same crimes in the same court 4 weeks earlier. What the press release does not mention is the Energy Secretary's planned visit to assess Venezuela's oil infrastructure, announced 1 month after the operation. The frame is drug trafficking. The picture inside the frame is something else entirely. Event 2, the indictment that waited 6 years, 2020-2026. On March 26, 2020, the United States Department of Justice announces a federal indictment against Nicolas Maduro and 13 current and former Venezuelan officials. The charges are narco-terrorism conspiracy, conspiracy to import cocaine, and possession of weapons in connection with a drug trafficking crime. The indictment alleges that Maduro and his co-conspirators use Venezuela's state apparatus, its military, its intelligence services, its territorial control, to facilitate the shipment of cocaine into the United States through a relationship with FARC, the Colombian guerrilla organization designated by the U.S. as a terrorist group. Attorney General William Barr presents the indictment personally. The Justice Department offers $15 million in reward money for information leading to Maduro's arrest. The announcement is made during the COVID-19 pandemic's first wave, when the American government's attention is divided. The indictment generates significant news coverage. Maduro denounces it as a political fabrication. He remains in Caracas. The indictment sits. It sits through the remainder of Trump's first term. It sits through the entirety of Biden's 4-year presidency. Biden pursues a policy of negotiated sanctions relief, engaging Venezuelan opposition figures and attempting diplomatic pressure. At various points, the Biden administration effectively eases enforcement of the indictment as a tool of that diplomacy. Maduro remains president. The indictment remains sealed in terms of active pursuit. For 6 years, it is a document, a real, filed federal indictment that the executive branch does not act on. What changes in January 2026 is the political will, not the legal basis. The charges are identical to what they are in 2020. The evidence does not change. What changes is the decision made by someone in the Trump administration's second term, at some point in the fall of 2025, that the indictment is no longer a diplomatic instrument but an operational target. The decision is made alongside a military buildup in the Caribbean that begins in September 2025, and that, in retrospect, is the operational preparation for what happens in January. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee before the operation. In that briefing, according to multiple Democratic senators who speak publicly afterward, they state that this is not regime change. They say the operation's purpose is law enforcement. They look at senators directly and describe what is about to happen in terms that the senators who hear it characterize as deliberately misleading. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut says publicly that he is lied to. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia says the same. These are specific named senators making specific documented claims about specific named cabinet members. The specific question of what changes between 2021 and 2026 to activate the indictment is documented in the military buildup that begins in September 2025. U.S. naval assets begin repositioning in the Caribbean. The aircraft carrier USS George Washington arrives in the Caribbean. The 160th SOAR begins deploying personnel and equipment to undisclosed forward operating locations in the region. This buildup is visible to regional intelligence services and to journalists who cover military movements. Its operational purpose is not announced. In retrospect, the buildup is the 6-month preparation phase for a January operation, the assets being positioned, the intelligence being gathered, the target being tracked. The decision to activate the indictment in 2026 rather than 2021 is a political decision made by the Trump administration in the fall of 2025. No public document explains the specific internal deliberation. What the available record shows is that the decision and the military buildup are simultaneous. The legal activation and the operational preparation begin at the same time, which means the indictment is not activated because new evidence emerges, but because the operational capacity to execute is being assembled. The charges are the legal framework built around an operational decision already made for other reasons. Rubio's and Hegseth's statements to the senators are not under oath, they are briefings. No legal mechanism exists to charge them for misleading Congress in this context. The lie, if it is a lie, and the senators who are present say it is, produces no legal consequence. The indictment's 6-year wait is the cover story's most revealing element. If the drug charges are the real reason for the operation, they exist in full in March 2020. They do not require 6 years and a change of administration. They require a decision about when to act. That decision is made in the fall of 2025 when the military assets are being deployed to the Caribbean. Whatever that decision is based on, it is not based on newly discovered evidence. Event 3, the oil number 300 billion barrels, 2007-2026. The Orinoco Belt in southeastern Venezuela contains the largest single concentration of extra-heavy crude oil in the world. The Venezuelan government, in assessments confirmed by international energy agencies, holds proven reserves of approximately 300 billion barrels, 17% of the entire planet's documented petroleum reserves, more oil than Saudi Arabia, more oil than Iran, more oil than Iraq. The largest proven reserves of any country on Earth, in a nation of 28 million people in the Western Hemisphere, 1,500 miles from Miami. Hugo Chavez nationalizes the Venezuelan oil industry aggressively after his election in 1998. By 2007, he forces the renegotiation or expropriation of contracts held by ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, BP, Total, and Statoil. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips refuse to accept the new terms. Chavez seizes their assets. The companies sue in international arbitration. The suits drag on for years. The oil companies receive partial compensation through arbitration awards. They do not receive their Venezuelan operations back. They do not have access to the Orinoco Belt. ExxonMobil's CEO from 2006 to 2016 is Rex Tillerson. In 2017, Tillerson becomes Donald Trump's first Secretary of State. He advocates for, and the Trump administration imposes, the first major round of Venezuela sanctions. Tillerson leaves the State Department in 2018. The sanctions remain and intensify across subsequent years. producing the collapse of Venezuelan oil production from approximately 2.5 million barrels per day at its peak to under 700,000 barrels per day by the time of the 2026 operation. On the morning of January 3, 2026, Trump calls into Fox News. He is asked about Venezuela's oil industry. He says, "We're going to run the country. We're going to have U.S. companies very strongly involved in it. That's all. What can I say? We have the greatest oil companies in the world." This statement is on video. It is not ambiguous. The President of the United States, hours after the capture of a foreign head of state on drug trafficking charges, says the real outcome is that American oil companies will be strongly involved in running Venezuela's oil sector. He says this voluntarily on camera in response to a question about oil. He says, "We're going to run the country." 1 month after the operation, Energy Secretary Chris Wright announces plans to visit Venezuela to meet all the leadership, the post-Maduro government installed under U.S. supervision, and assess oil and gas operations. The acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, proposes reforms to Venezuela's hydrocarbons law that ease the nationalization restrictions Chavez imposed in 2007. The restrictions that cost ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips their Venezuelan operations. The restrictions that the current U.S. Energy Secretary is flying to Venezuela to assess. The specific legal barrier that U.S. oil companies have been lobbying to remove for 19 years is being removed before Maduro's trial concludes. The specific timeline of American oil company lobbying on Venezuela policy is documented in federal lobbying disclosures filed quarterly with Congress. ExxonMobil's lobbying expenditures on Venezuela-related policy begin increasing in 2017, the same year Rex Tillerson becomes Secretary of State. ConocoPhillips, which wins a $2 billion arbitration award against Venezuela in 2019, but cannot collect it because of sanctions, maintains continuous Venezuela-related lobbying through the Biden years and into the Trump second term. Chevron, which uniquely maintains a limited operational presence in Venezuela through a sanctions waiver granted under Biden, is the company most directly positioned to expand operations if the nationalization restrictions are lifted. Its CEO, Mike Wirth, meets with senior Trump administration officials multiple times in the fall of 2025, the same period the military buildup begins in the Caribbean. The lobbying disclosures are public documents. They are filed with the Senate's Lobbying Disclosure Act database. They are available to any journalist or researcher who looks for them. They document a direct financial connection between the companies that stand to benefit from Venezuela's oil sector opening and the political infrastructure of the administration that authorizes the operation that opens it. Nobody has to speculate about the oil motive. The president states it on camera. The lobbyist records document the prior influence effort. The Energy Secretary's visit to Caracas confirms the policy outcome. The drug charges are real. The oil motive is also real. The president states both. The drug charges are in the press release. The oil motive is in the Fox News interview. The cover story obscures the second story. The second story is the one that explains the timing. Event 4, The Lies to Congress, January 2026. The United States Constitution is specific about war powers. Article I, Section 8 gives Congress the power to declare war. The War Powers Resolution of 1973, passed over President Nixon's veto in the aftermath of Vietnam, requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to hostilities in foreign territory and limits the duration of those hostilities to 60 days without congressional authorization. The resolution has been largely circumvented by every administration since its passage, through the legal argument that police actions, counterterrorism operations, and other uses of force do not constitute hostilities under the resolution's terms. Operation Absolute Resolve is a military raid on a foreign capital that kills at least 80 people and results in the forcible removal of a foreign head of state. The Trump administration does not seek congressional authorization. It does not notify the Congressional Intelligence Committees beforehand. It does not invoke the War Powers Resolution. It conducts the operation as a law enforcement action, a drug trafficking arrest carried out by military personnel in another country without that country's consent, under a legal theory drawn from a 1989 Department of Justice memorandum. The 1989 DOJ memo is real. It is written during the legal preparation for Operation Just Cause, the 1989 U.S. invasion of Panama that results in the capture of Manuel Noriega. The memo establishes the legal argument that American law enforcement authority can operate extraterritorially, that U.S. agents can arrest individuals in foreign countries even if that action violates the domestic law of the foreign country or international law, as long as the arrest is in service of U.S. federal criminal jurisdiction. The memo's legal theory is contested internationally. It has never been tested in a U.S. Supreme Court case on this specific factual scenario. The Trump administration relies on this 37-year-old memo as its primary legal justification for the Venezuela operation. The memo is not a statute, it is not a treaty, it is not a court decision. It is a legal opinion written by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel to provide legal cover for an operation the executive branch has already decided to conduct. The executive branch uses its own legal analysis produced by its own lawyers to justify its own military action without congressional authorization in a foreign country against a sitting head of state. When Rubio and Hegseth briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democratic senators including Murphy and Kynes say publicly afterward that the briefing is designed to mislead. The senators say they are told the operation is not regime change. They say they are told the goal is law enforcement. They say what they are told does not match what happens within hours of the briefing's conclusion. Murphy says they lied. Kynes says they looked every member in the eye and stated this was not about regime change. Rubio appears on camera after the operation and defends both the legal theory and the strategic outcome. He does not address the senators' accusations of deception directly. Hegseth calls the operation a historic success. Neither is charged with anything. Neither faces a disciplinary proceeding. They brief the Senate. They lie, the senators say. The operation succeeds. Nothing happens to anyone who lies. The specific senators who speak publicly after the briefing are on record with specific claims. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, says on January 4, 2026 that Marco Rubio looks him and every senator in the briefing directly in the eye and states that this operation is not about regime change and is not about oil. Murphy says Rubio says this clearly, unambiguously, and as a direct statement of administration intent. Hours after the briefing ends, Trump calls into Fox News and says American oil companies will be very strongly involved in running Venezuela. Murphy says publicly, the Secretary of State lied. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia says the same thing in separate public statements. Both senators are Democrats. The Republican senators who attend the briefing do not publicly contradict Murphy and Kaine's account of what Rubio says. They do not publicly confirm it either. They are silent on the specific question of what Rubio tells the committee. That silence is its own kind of answer. Rubio does not respond directly to Murphy and Kaine's accusations. His press office issues a statement defending the operation's legal basis and its strategic rationale. The specific claim that he lies to Congress in a classified briefing is not addressed, denied, or acknowledged. The precedent established is that an executive branch official can say one thing in a classified Senate briefing and the opposite thing on television an hour later without any institutional mechanism compelling accountability. This is what conducting a war without congressional authorization looks like in 2026. Not a declaration, not a vote, not a debate. A briefing that deceives the people who are constitutionally responsible for authorizing what happens in that briefing. And then the helicopters, Event 5, the Honduras pardon, the comparison that breaks the official story, December 2025. Juan Orlando Hernandez is 66 years old in December 2025. He is the former president of Honduras, a two-term leader who governs from 2014 to 2022, and who is, in the documented record of a federal jury in the Southern District of New York, a drug trafficker, not alleged, convicted, jury verdict. He receives money from drug lords including Joaquin, El Chapo, Guzman Loera. He uses that money to fund his political campaigns. He uses the power of the Honduran presidency to protect drug shipments and shield cartel leaders from prosecution. He is sentenced by Judge Kevin Castile of the Southern District of New York to 45 years in federal prison. The same court, the same legal theory of using state power to facilitate drug trafficking, the same charge, narco-terrorism conspiracy, the same Southern District of New York prosecutors who handle the Maduro indictment. 1 month before Operation Absolute Resolve captures Maduro, President Trump pardons Juan Orlando Hernandez. The pardon is announced in early December 2025. It is pushed publicly by Roger Stone, the Trump political operative who is himself a convicted felon pardoned by Trump in his first term. Stone advocates publicly for the Hernandez pardon and the pardon is granted. Hernandez walks out of federal prison. His 45-year sentence is erased. The jury's verdict stands in the record but produces no imprisonment. Hernandez's Honduras cooperates with U.S. policy in the region. Honduras, under Hernandez's government, allows American military basing rights, cooperation on migration enforcement, and alignment with Washington's regional security posture. He is, in the functional currency of U.S.-Latin American relations, a useful client. His crimes are the same crimes Maduro is charged with. His client relationship with Washington is favorable. He goes free. Maduro's Venezuela refuses to cooperate with Washington. It nationalizes oil. It maintains Chinese and Russian partnerships. It is, in the functional currency of U.S.-Latin American relations, an adversarial government sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves. His crimes are the same crimes Hernandez is convicted of. His relationship with Washington is hostile. He goes to Brooklyn. The comparison is not circumstantial. It is documented in court records, in presidential pardon announcements, in the trial transcripts of 2 men prosecuted in the same courthouse under the same legal theory. The DOJ does not address this comparison in any public statement. Rubio does not address it. No one in the Trump administration addresses it. They do not need to. The American media cycle moves to the next story. The comparison sits in the public record, available to anyone who looks for it, never quite loud enough to override the official frame. The official frame is drug trafficking. The comparison proves the frame is selective. Not wrong, the charges are real, selective, which means the frame is not about justice, it is about something else. Roger Stone's public advocacy for the Hernandez pardon is documented in his posts and interviews in the weeks before it is granted. Stone argues that Hernandez is a political prisoner of a broken justice system, that his prosecution is an example of the same anti-conservative political weaponization of the courts that Trump himself claims to have experienced. Stone frames the Hernandez pardon as a principled stand against partisan prosecution. He does not address the jury verdict, the drug trafficking evidence, or the 45-year sentence directly. Trump grants the pardon. The Justice Department does not issue a public statement explaining the legal basis for pardoning a foreign national convicted of narco-terrorism by an American jury. The SDNY prosecutors who spend years building the Hernandez case and secure the conviction watch their work erased by executive action. Their work is the same legal work, the same theory, the same charges, the same type of evidence, being used simultaneously in Brooklyn to prosecute Maduro. The prosecutors in Brooklyn continue their case. The prosecutors who build the Hernandez case have nothing. The distance between the two outcomes, Hernandez free in Honduras, Maduro in a Brooklyn federal detention center, is not a distance of evidence. The evidence is comparable. The distance is geopolitical. One man's country cooperates with Washington. The other man's country has the oil. The jury convicted both of them in principle. Only one of them sits in an American cell. Hernandez is free. He has no comment. Event 6. The CIA asset inside Caracas, 2002-2026. The CIA's history with Venezuela is not recent. It begins with Hugo Chavez. In April 2002, a coup removes Chavez from power for 47 hours. He is seized by Venezuelan military officers with documented connections to figures the CIA is monitoring. Pedro Carmona, a Venezuelan businessman, is installed as acting president. Within 48 hours, the coup collapses, Chavez is restored, and the short-lived government dissolves. The Bush administration initially welcomes the coup's success. When it fails, the State Department issues a statement characterizing the events as a popular uprising rather than a coup. Declassified CIA cables, released through FOIA requests in the years following the coup, established that the agency was aware of the planning in advance. The cables do not establish direct U.S. involvement in the coup's execution. They establish that the CIA knew it was coming and did not warn Chávez's government. The specific CIA asset whose intelligence enables Operation Absolute Resolve is not publicly identified. What is reported, in the first-wave coverage from outlets including the Associated Press, Reuters, and the New York Times, is that a CIA source inside the Venezuelan government tracks Maduro's location and movements for months before January 3, 2026. The asset's identity, nationality, and specific institutional position within the Venezuelan government are not disclosed. The reporting characterizes the asset as someone with consistent, high-quality access to Maduro's schedule and physical location. This is senior-level access, someone in the circle of people who know where Maduro sleeps. The infrastructure behind this asset, the CIA's Venezuela operations, is substantial. The agency has run intelligence operations in Venezuela continuously since the Chávez years. The 2002 coup attempt is the most publicly documented episode. The Maduro years produce a sustained intelligence effort directed at a government the United States has officially designated as a state narco-terrorism sponsor. The sanctions regime, the indictments, and the intelligence collection are three parallel tracks of a single policy. The intelligence collection enables the enforcement that the sanctions regime is designed to facilitate. January 3rd is the enforcement track reaching its conclusion. The legal question the CIA asset raises is the question of sovereignty. Venezuela does not consent to the operation. The asset's activity inside the Venezuelan government, feeding precise location intelligence to American military planners for an operation designed to seize Venezuela's head of state, constitutes espionage by the definition of Venezuelan law and of international law. The United States does not acknowledge the asset's existence officially. The asset's conduct is not accountable to any publicly known legal standard. The asset is, in the operational reality of American intelligence, an instrument of U.S. foreign policy whose legal status exists only in the classified frameworks of executive authority that the public cannot examine. The specific documented history of CIA involvement in Venezuelan politics between 2002 and 2026 provides the institutional context for the January asset operation. After the 2002 coup's failure, the CIA's Venezuela station maintains continuous intelligence collection operations. The station's activities during the Chávez years include monitoring of Venezuelan government officials, tracking of Russian and Chinese military and intelligence presence in Venezuela, and ongoing assessment of Venezuela's oil production capabilities and infrastructure. The Church Committee's documentation of CIA activities in Chile in the early 1970s, activities that include specific asset recruitment inside the target government, provides the historical template that the Venezuela station's operations follow. The asset recruited inside Maduro's government for the January operation represents the culmination of a multi-year cultivation effort. Intelligence assets at the level required to track a head of state's nightly location are not recruited and activated in weeks. They are recruited over years, tested through smaller intelligence tasks, graduated to higher access positions, and finally activated for the highest value collection task. The CIA's Venezuela station has been running this kind of cultivation operation continuously since at least 2002. The specific individual who provides the January 3rd targeting intelligence is the product of that long-term program. He or she is, in the operational framework of U.S. intelligence, doing exactly what the CIA trains assets to do. Their identity is protected. Their existence enables 80 deaths and the removal of a foreign government. There is no legal framework through which their actions are adjudicated. The CIA runs the asset enables the capture enables the oil is why Trump says what he says at 7:00 in the morning. The asset is the invisible link in the chain, and the chain has been building since 2002, Event 7, the Monroe Doctrine, 1823 to 2026, historical pattern. James Monroe is 65 years old on December 2, 1823, when he delivers the annual message to Congress that contains the foreign policy principle that will bear his name for 2 centuries. The Monroe Doctrine's core assertion is this: The Western Hemisphere is the United States' sphere of influence, and European powers should not establish new colonies or extend their political systems into it. In 1823, the doctrine is directed at European colonialism. By the 20th century, it is applied to any government in Latin America that aligns with ideologies or powers that Washington considers threatening. The doctrine's evolution from anti-colonialism to pro-intervention is the most significant unacknowledged transformation in American foreign policy history. Guatemala, 1954. Jacobo Arbenz is the democratically elected president of Guatemala. He nationalizes 400,000 acres of unused land held by the United Fruit Company, an American corporation with extensive Guatemalan operations and direct connections to the Eisenhower administration. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Alan Dulles both have ties to United Fruit's law firm. The CIA runs Operation PBSUCCSS, a covert coup that removes Arbenz in June 1954. A U.S.-backed military junta takes power. The land nationalization is reversed. The United Fruit Company's holdings are restored. Arbenz spends the rest of his life in exile. Chile, 1973. Salvador Allende is the democratically elected president of Chile, the first Marxist elected to executive power in Latin American history. He nationalizes the Chilean copper industry, including mines owned by Anaconda Copper and Kennecott Copper, both American companies. The Nixon administration, through the CIA, spends 3 years destabilizing his government, funding opposition media, supporting opposition strikes, coordinating with Chilean military officers. On September 11, 1973, Chilean military forces storm the presidential palace. Allende is found dead inside, either shot by the coup forces or by his own hand. The historical record is contested. Augusto Pinochet takes power. The copper company's Chilean operations are restored or compensated. Pinochet governs for 17 years. Iran, 1953. Mohammad Mossadegh is the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. He nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, a British corporation in which the British government holds majority shares and which controls Iran's entire oil industry. The nationalization triggers an international crisis. The CIA, working with British intelligence under Operation Ajax, orchestrates a coup in August 1953 that removes Mossadegh and restores Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi to full power. The Shah denationalizes Iran's oil industry. A consortium of Western oil companies, including American companies BP, Gulf, Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of California, Texaco, and Sakani Mobil, receives 40% of Iran's oil production rights. The CIA's role in the coup is classified for decades. It is officially acknowledged by the United States government in 2013, 60 years later. Panama, 1989. Manuel Noriega is the military dictator of Panama. He has been on the CIA's payroll for decades, a documented U.S. intelligence asset since the 1970s. By the late 1980s, he is also, in the documented record, facilitating cocaine shipments for the Medellin cartel. He is indicted in Miami in 1988 on drug trafficking charges. He refuses to leave office. The George H.W. Bush administration launches Operation Just Cause, 27,000 troops, the largest American military operation since Vietnam. Noriega is captured, brought to Miami, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years. He serves 23 years in American custody before being extradited to France and then Panama. The Panama Canal Zone remains under U.S. operational influence. Venezuela, 2026. The template is consistent across 72 years. A Latin American government comes into conflict with American economic interests. A legal theory is found or constructed. A leader is removed. American economic access is restored. The specific form changes with each decade: direct military invasion, CIA-sponsored coup, sanctions plus indictment plus Delta Force. The underlying mechanism does not change. The declassified documents from the Guatemala and Chile operations are available in the National Archives. The CIA's operational history in Panama is substantially documented in the Church Committee records and subsequent declassifications. The historical pattern is not a theory. It is a documented record that the 2026 Venezuela operation fits with the precision of a template being followed rather than a policy being invented. Event 8, the International Law Question, 2026. Nicolas Maduro Moros is a head of state at the time of his capture. This is not contested. He is the sitting president of Venezuela, recognized as such by a majority of nations in the world, even as the United States and some allied governments refuse to recognize his 2018 re-election as legitimate. The question of whether a sitting head of state, recognized by the majority of the international community, can be arrested by a foreign military in his own capital without his country's consent, based on indictments issued by that foreign country's courts, is a question that the international legal community does not consider settled. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers, Diego Garcia Sayan, issues a statement within days of the capture. His statement is direct. There is a very clear limit on enforcement jurisdiction internationally, and that is that one state cannot enforce its law on the territory of another state unless that state gives its consent. Venezuela does not consent. Venezuela explicitly protests the operation as a violation of international law, national sovereignty, and the United Nations Charter's prohibition on the use of force against the territorial integrity of member states. The head of state immunity doctrine, recognized in customary international law and in the jurisdictional provisions of the International Court of Justice, provides that sitting heads of state cannot be subjected to the criminal jurisdiction of foreign courts. The doctrine is contested in application. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for sitting heads of state, and the U.S. does not recognize ICJ jurisdiction over its own conduct. But the doctrine exists, is recognized by international legal scholars, and provides the foundation for Venezuela's legal challenge to both the arrest and the pending trial. The 1989 DOJ memo, the legal opinion the Trump administration relies on, was written to justify the arrest of Manuel Noriega in Panama. The memo's central argument is that the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act does not apply to heads of state in criminal proceedings in U.S. courts, and that American law enforcement jurisdiction can operate extraterritorially. The memo has never been tested in the Supreme Court on the specific question of whether it applies to a sitting, internationally recognized head of state captured by military force in his own country's capital. The Maduro case will almost certainly reach the Supreme Court. The specific legal questions it presents: extraterritorial military arrest of a foreign head of state, executive action without congressional authorization, the validity of the 1989 DOJ memo's extraterritorial arrest theory, are questions that current Supreme Court precedent does not clearly answer. What the Supreme Court decides will determine what the next president can do, to what government, under what pretextual legal theory. If the court upholds the executive authority claimed here, any American president can indict a foreign leader on any charge that can be documented, deploy military force to capture that leader, bring him to an American court, and claim the entire operation is law enforcement rather than war. That is the legal authority this case is establishing. That is the precedent the Maduro trial creates regardless of how the specific charges are resolved. The question is not whether Maduro's crimes are real. The question is whether the United States has the legal authority to enforce its criminal law in any country, against any leader, at any time it chooses. The specific Supreme Court cases the Maduro defense will invoke are already being discussed by constitutional law scholars in the immediate aftermath of the operation. Zivotofsky v. Kerry, a 2015 Supreme Court case on executive authority over foreign recognition, and Hamdi v. Rumsfeld, a 2004 case on executive detention authority, provide the doctrinal context in which the Maduro case's constitutional questions will be argued. The specific novel question, whether the executive branch can use military force to arrest a foreign head of state in his own country without congressional authorization and then subject him to federal criminal prosecution, has no direct Supreme Court precedent. It is a genuinely open constitutional question that this case will force the court to answer. The answer the court gives will be one of the most significant expansions or limitations of executive war power since the Youngstown sheet and tube case of 1952. If the court upholds the administration's authority, if it accepts that the 1989 DOJ memo provides sufficient legal grounding for extraterritorial military arrest under domestic criminal law, Every future administration has that precedent in its arsenal. The next time a government nationalizes a resource, the mechanism exists and has been judicially blessed. International legal scholars publishing in the months after the operation characterize the precedent as among the most significant expansions of claimed executive war power in American history. Not because the president acts unilaterally, that is not new. Because the legal theory the administration advances, if accepted by the courts, removes any remaining legal boundary on extraterritorial military enforcement of domestic criminal law. The world is watching. The countries watching are the ones with resources the United States wants. Event 9. What America is actually running now, 2026. On February 15, 2026, 6 weeks after the operation, Energy Secretary Chris Wright boards a plane to Caracas. His stated purpose, to meet all the leadership of the post-Maduro Venezuelan government and assess the country's oil and gas operations. He travels not to assess political conditions. He travels to assess infrastructure, production capacity, pipeline integrity. The technical condition of the Orinoco Belt's extraction facilities after years of sanctions-induced underinvestment. He is doing the due diligence that precedes a business deal on behalf of the government of the United States in a country that government just forcibly depopulated of its previous leadership. Delcy Rodriguez is the acting president of Venezuela following Maduro's capture. She is his former foreign minister and vice president, a socialist politician from the Chavista tradition, a person whose politics are not materially different from Maduro's. She is the person the Trump administration is working with to govern Venezuela in the transitional period. Her government, within weeks of taking power, proposes reforms to Venezuela's hydrocarbons law, specifically, reforms that ease the nationalization restrictions Hugo Chavez imposes in 2007, the restrictions that result in ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips leaving Venezuela with arbitration claims rather than production rights. Trump says on January 3rd, "We're going to run the country." This statement in the first coverage cycle is treated as Trump hyperbole, colorful language that does not represent actual policy. 6 weeks later, the Energy Secretary is in Caracas assessing the oil infrastructure. The acting president is proposing to dismantle the nationalization framework. The United States military maintains a quarantine of Venezuelan waters that was established during the operational buildup and has not been lifted. The military presence continues. The oil law changes. The Energy Secretary visits. "We're going to run the country." 6 weeks later, that is what the documented record shows is happening. The specific American oil companies whose interests are most directly advanced by the removal of Venezuela's nationalization framework are documented in lobbying records filed with Congress. ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, the companies that lose their Venezuelan operations between 2005 and 2007, that receive partial arbitration awards rather than their assets, that have spent nearly 2 decades unable to access the world's largest proven oil reserves, are the companies whose contracts are now being discussed in the meetings Chris Wright is facilitating. Their representatives have been in Washington throughout the sanctions-building period of the last decade. Their lobbying expenditures related to Venezuela policy are in the public record. Their interest in access to the Orinoco Belt is not a secret. It is a documented, filed, publicly available lobbying interest that the Trump administration's Venezuela policy directly serves. The drug charges against Maduro remain pending before a federal judge in Brooklyn. The trial has not concluded. The legal proceedings continue. And simultaneously, the oil policy the operation is designed to produce is being implemented before the trial that justifies the operation even begins. The policy outcome precedes the legal outcome. The legal proceedings legitimate retroactively a policy decision that is already being executed. The specific provisions of Venezuela's new hydrocarbons law being drafted under U.S. supervised transition are reported by Venezuelan outlet Efecto Cucuyo and by Reuters' Caracas Bureau in February 2026. The draft provisions include a reduction in the state's mandatory equity stake in joint ventures from 60%, the Chavez-era minimum, to 40%. They include liberalized profit repatriation rules that allow foreign oil companies to transfer earnings out of Venezuela, without the currency restrictions the Maduro government maintains. They include a simplified licensing process for new exploration in the Orinoco Belt that removes the ministerial approval requirements Maduro uses to block Western companies from acquiring new acreage. These specific provisions, reduced state equity, profit repatriation, simplified Orinoco licensing, are precisely the concessions that ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron's lobbyists have sought in Washington policy discussions for 15 years. They are in the lobbying disclosures. They are in the oil industry's public statements about Venezuelan policy. They are, in the language of the industry, the conditions necessary for significant capital investment in Venezuela's upstream sector. The conditions are being written into law while Maduro awaits trial in Brooklyn. Whatever the jury decides about Maduro's drug trafficking charges, the Orinoco Belt's nationalization is already being unwound. The oil is already being assessed. The Energy Secretary's plane has already landed. The thing that needed to happen for American oil companies has already happened. The trial is for the press release. The oil is for the companies. And the 80 people who die on January 3rd do not appear in any statement about oil. Event 10, the pattern and the precedent, 2026 and beyond. What Operation Absolute Resolve establishes is not just what happened in Venezuela in January 2026. It establishes what happens next in the next country, under the next administration, the next time a Latin American or African or Southeast Asian government sits on a resource the United States wants and runs a government Washington considers adversarial. The template is now complete. It contains a real federal indictment filed years in advance, maintained in reserve as a legal instrument that can be activated when the political will exists. A covert intelligence operation running for months that produces actionable targeting intelligence for the military strike. A military force capable of executing a sovereign capture mission in a foreign capital with precision sufficient to minimize the operation's visibility to the international community until it is complete. A legal theory, the 1989 DOJ memo, that claims extraterritorial enforcement jurisdiction for American criminal law. A cover story, drug trafficking, that is documented in real charges, real evidence, and a real sealed indictment, making it impossible to dismiss without appearing to defend the defendant's actual crimes. And an immediate policy outcome, oil, copper, lithium, whatever the resource is that the captured government's removal enables. The countries watching this template operate include Bolivia, which nationalized its lithium industry and which the United States has expressed strategic interest in. They include Ecuador, whose government oscillates between resource nationalism and foreign investment openness. They include the Democratic Republic of Congo, which holds 60% of the world's cobalt reserves. They include Indonesia and the Philippines, whose governments sit on nickel and other materials critical to battery manufacturing. Each of these governments now knows what a complete American operational capability looks like when it is deployed against a government that controls a resource the United States wants and that has a domestic political figure susceptible to federal criminal charges. The accountability for Operation Absolute Resolve is, as of this video's research, essentially non-existent on the American side. Rubio is Secretary of State, Hegseth is Secretary of Defense, Trump is President. The senators who say they are lied to cannot compel accountability through a Senate minority. The legal challenges are pending in courts that take years to produce decisions. The international law criticism is issued by UN rapporteurs whose statements produce no enforcement mechanism. The 80 people killed on January 3rd are not acknowledged in any American government communication. No investigation of their deaths is opened by any American institution. What is coming out slowly through the work of specific people is documented in the reporting of outlets including the Associated Press, ProPublica, The Guardian, and the Venezuelan journalism organization Efecto Cucuyo, which covers the human cost of the operation in the detail that American outlets do not. The senators who speak publicly, Murphy and Kine, put their accounts in the congressional record. Legal scholars including Harold Koh at Yale, who serves as State Department legal advisor under Obama, publish analyses characterizing the operation's legal framework as a significant departure from established international law. International lawyers at the ICJ and at specialized human rights tribunals file preliminary assessments. This is the pattern that connects every video on this channel. Not that governments lie, that is assumed. Not that corporations influence foreign policy, that is documented. The pattern is more specific, that the official justification is always real enough to provide cover, that the cover is always maintained long enough for the policy outcome to be locked in, and that the accountability mechanisms that are supposed to correct the gap between the official justification and the real one are consistently insufficient to change anything that matters. The drug charges against Maduro are real. The oil motive is stated by the president on camera. The Honduras comparison is in court records. The precedent is being established in a federal courthouse in Brooklyn right now. What happens next depends entirely on whether anyone is watching closely enough to name what they see. The pattern this video documents runs from 1954 Guatemala to 2026 Venezuela, and it does not change. What changes is the legal sophistication of the cover story. In 1954, the CIA stages a coup and calls it a popular uprising. In 1973, it finances a destabilization campaign and calls it civil unrest. In 1989, it invades Panama and calls it law enforcement. In 2026, it indicts a president, builds an intelligence operation, deploys Delta Force, and calls it a drug arrest. Each iteration is more legally defensible than the last. Each iteration makes the real motive harder to name without appearing to defend the real crimes that provide the cover. The people who break this open are doing it in real time, which is different from every previous video on this channel. This is not a 50-year declassification. The senators who say they are lied to are speaking now in the congressional record, and that record will not be erased. The UN rapporteur's statement is public. Trump's own words about oil are on video and will not be classified. The Honduras comparison sits in federal court records that are not going anywhere. The lobbying disclosures are filed. The oil executives' travel to Caracas is documented. The hydrocarbons law changes are being reported by Venezuelan journalists who are risking more than anyone in this story to do it. The specific journalists and lawyers who are generating the accountability record, the Associated Press investigative team, the ProPublica reporters, Harold Coe's legal analysis, Efecto Cucuyo's ground reporting in Venezuela, are the people doing what this channel exists to document, refusing to let the official story be the only story. They deserve to be named. They are the reason this video is possible. What happened on January 3, 2026 is documented. What it means for the next government that nationalizes a resource, the next leader who makes himself inconvenient, the next country that sits on something the United States wants, that is the question the Maduro trial cannot answer because it was never the trial's job to answer it. The trial is for the press release. The pattern is the point. The pattern is always the point. The specific country, the specific leader, the specific crime that provides the cover, these change with geography and decade. The underlying logic does not. Resource plus adversarial government plus available legal theory plus operational capacity equals removal. It takes different forms. It produces different press releases. The oil, the copper, the lithium, whatever is underneath the ground, remains. Sitting with the fact that the President of the United States watches a military operation against a foreign government on screens at a resort and calls a television network to describe it like a movie, that lands differently than any historical parallel I have studied on this channel, because it is not hidden. It is announced. History is not what happened. History is what we choose to remember, to teach, and to demand accountability for. The rest is what powerful people hope you forget. Don't forget. If this video reached you, share it, subscribe, leave a comment with the event that hit you hardest. Come back for the next one, because there are more.